my sister was being born. She was 11 years younger than I was. So my father had to drive because my mother was busy giving birth.
Yeah.
And it was faith testing. Let's just put that way. It was a very, very, very interesting time.
Have you ever tried contacts by any time?
I have, yes. I used to wear contacts in high school. I really stopped, and I wear them some in the Navy. I really kind of stopped wearing them in the Navy, which is kind of a bother. And I just kind of, I find the glasses work just as well.
The reason I asked, because years back, I got them, thought I'd try them out.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get used to something like this in my
eye. Yeah, no, my brother's that way. He can't do that at all.
Couldn't get used to it. So that was years later. So, recently I went home for my sister's wedding to Bermuda.
Mm.
And I figured I was, in the wedding, matron of honor. I'm like, well, to be able to see people from far away, I don't want to have to wear my glasses.
Sure.
You'll doll up and So I made an appointment. I'm like, I'm going to try these contacts one more time. And I go to the eye doctor before I left Florida, get, measured for contacts and all that.
Sure.
And I get them and I wear them the day that I got them. And you're supposed to build up,
Right.
And that was the one and only day. So it's like, it was wasted money, wasted time. I just couldn't, the feeling of something in my eyes.
It's weird.
So I just said, so the purpose was to wear to my sister's wedding. And I just said, well, I'm just going to have to go without glasses and pray that anybody I need to see, I'll see. And it all worked out.
Oh, okay. That's funny.
Yeah.
So we can get started. I'll give a little bit of time to see if Kurt came on. That's okay. So we're going to start at Romans 6:12. And so we're really going to try to cover a couple verses because this is kind of the hinge in the chapter. Really 6 through 11 is sort of that powerhouse section, 6:1 through 11, where we really investigate the change in status that comes from being baptized into the death of Christ, right? Paul is trying to get us to see that something real has happened, something supernatural has happened within our baptism that's changed all true Christians. And that when we think of that action, when we think of our work in maintaining our holiness, that we look back to that event and remember what change has happened. I think this gets into what happens in 12 to 14, but a big idea that we always want to think about here is the difference between the reality we face every single day, the reality put forward by our corrupt culture, our corrupt government, and various. It's all corrupt all the way through.
Right.
Our actions can be corrupt too. This isn't a unique thing. I think this is one reason why people are so dissatisfied when they look for relief from politics. They come away just angry and just upset at everything because there's a sense we get that doesn't solve this problem. In Paul's day, he's dealing with the Roman Empire, but that's the same idea, same concept is happening here. That isn't the thing that's going to bring us peace. And so what Paul's always trying to get us to recognize is that the supernatural reality, the reality of heaven, the reality of our changed status through baptism, that is the actual reality. What everything else is in a sense, always shaded by the lies that all told all around us. And it's very difficult for us to see through that. And so one of the reasons we are constantly called back to worship together, to study the Word together, to be in the Word together, is we need that all the time to sort of remind us of this actual reality. Because it is so easy for us to fall into the trap of what our enemy has set for us. This is spiritual warfare that we're talking about here. That's very, very real. The great news is the enemy we face is not one who is all-powerful or he even is destined to win. He's a defeated enemy. And we're going to go into the tragedy of what happens when Christians forget that he's defeated. They forget their freedom. But the great news that we'll see in 12 through 14 is that God's not going to let us go. that the good work started in us will be worked out to the end. That's so much of the refrain of 5 and 6, right? The good work started in us will come to fruition. That there's nothing the world can do to break that, because it's not our righteousness and our salvation is not in us; it's in Christ. So let's take a look at verse 12. Let not sin, therefore, reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions. So what Paul, once again, there's this idea of these kingdoms, right? The idea of reigning, the idea of the kingdom of sin and death, and the kingdom of righteousness, grace, righteousness, and life. Those are really those two kingdoms that are always in view. Satan is let in to begin to rule on this earth through humanity's failure to keep him out. We welcome him in and we join in his rebellion. It's Christ's definitive action of stepping into the place of humanity as a human, as both God and man, and undoing that changes everything. And that's the reality Paul is living in. It's the reality we're living in. That sin no longer has to reign. Sin can't reign. If Christ is true, if Christians truly live in Christ, then sin has no business ruling our lives. It has no hold on us. It really has no right to have any hold on us. So a question we can ask is, what chance does sin have to rule if the Christian has died to it through baptism? So a big part of 1 through 11 was that concept of in baptism we've died to sin. That imagery that we see of being sort of crucified along with Christ. That's powerful imagery. That's an objective thing that we're involved in. So what chance does sin have then? Shouldn't we all not be sinning, right? So the answer to that is that sin, while it's no longer enthroned, it no longer has any authority over us. The tragedy is it can still provide attraction to our mortal bodies. It still seems like it's something we want. There's still that residue of it. And that's what that idea of mortal body, what is that talking about? The idea is that we still possess a body. It's our whole person. And that body will one day die. And in an ethical sense, every day we die to sin. There's a way in which every day we sort of put flesh to death, as Paul puts it. Not in a way in which we hurt ourselves. That's not what he's talking about. But that suffering we feel as that purging of our hearts from hatred and malice and sin and death, all that's happening, the Holy Spirit making us holy. Every time we say no to sin, every single day, it's like a little death that's happening. But that death isn't an end, and that death can be used for God's purposes. There's once again we run into that very uncomfortable friction between the American, really Western, but very much an American myth, religious myth, in that prosperity equals blessing, comfort equals good, pain equals bad, suffering equals bad. That's very much a modern American myth, and that's just not reflected anywhere in here. We always get the sense that suffering in this world, in the way in which we change our lives so that they conform to the reality that's true, the spiritual reality, that always is gonna hurt a little bit. That's always going to not feel totally great, and it shouldn't, because we live in a fallen world. And we live in these mortal bodies that are still there, that are still very much a part of us, and that our death will be the final purging of that. But the great news is that death is nothing. That death compared to, because we know we are rising in glory, that death becomes, while not inconsequential, because no one would ever say dying is inconsequential, it becomes not the end of our story, but the beginning. We're truly connected with the God who goes down to the grave and comes out glorified just as we will. We're moving closer to that full connection between those two things every single day. And it changes the way we think about aging, for instance. It changes the way we think about our whole life. We recognize that we're not marching towards an executioner. We're marching towards our glory. It changes the way, for instance, one thinks about a martyr's death. I mean, a 35-year-old woman who dies for the faith, is that a tragedy? There's a certain sense which depends on what she's marching towards. Even as in that moment when she's marching towards the executioner who's going to destroy her, the reality here is that he can't destroy her. To us, that looks nuts. If we look if we just see the physical reality of it, we're just looking at it from the way the world looks. That doesn't make sense. She should renounce the faith and run away or find some way to get out of there. But if what she's marching towards is her reunion with her king, and she's one step closer to the resurrection and glory, then that's a whole different march she's making. Always reminding ourselves of that is so difficult, because we're just trained not to think that way. We're trained to think in the way the world wants us to. It's interesting that passions, again, every time we find this in Paul, it's always negative. And when we look at how he says this, what makes you, what's trying to make you obey its passion, whose passions, what passions? Sin. Passions are almost really never a good thing in the Bible. Which is another fascinating way we talk about passion. We're always like,
it's always a positive thing.
It's always a positive thing.
Right.
Find your passion. How many school children have been told, find your passion and go do it?
Right.
Which is not the biblical trajectory at all. Your passion is a fallen part of you. Your passion is something that leads you to do bad things. Really, we would be much better served by asking children to find their vocation. Find the reason God's put you on earth. Like, what is your purpose? Like, why are you here? What is your gift? What talents has God given you to spread the word of his kingdom? And that's why we're here. Unfortunately, I hear Christians say, oh, find your passion. And that's the thing, that's the thing speaking to you. What do you think?
No, I agree, but I'm wondering if we use that, because even if we say find your gift or find your calling, a lot of times we can identify with that based on something we enjoy doing that God gifted us. So like, say I enjoy writing. I enjoy writing. So of course I look at that as I'm passionate about writing.
Right.
And so I use that writing in my work, and hopefully it's helping mankind, that sort of thing. So I wonder, if it's just a word that's been used loosely that way, because you mean passionate because you like it,
Yeah, sure.
You enjoy communicating or whatever. So
absolutely. I think that a person can use passion in that way, in a positive way. The problem is that it's hard to find a limiting principle of it.
Yeah, because we do get so focused on it. Then it becomes about me, and all about
it. Becomes,
we lose sight of
if my calling,
the design of it.
If my calling is to do the things I like, it's very difficult for me to talk to a young person who comes up to me and says, the thing I would like most in the whole world is my girlfriend. And I think that God is calling me, because I feel it inside of me so much, that we should have premarital sex. And now I have to say, no.
Right.
That's that feeling, that passion that you feel, which is the most passion you've ever felt in your entire life, is a lie. Well, lies is a bit of a strong term. The enemy is using it as a way to destroy you.
Right.
That love you feel is real, and it's meant to be enjoyed in the way you were designed to enjoy it.
Right.
In a one flesh marriage covenant for the rest of your life. That is what you're feeling, but the enemy will use that feeling for his purposes.
To take it out of context and time.
Right, to turn it into a weapon for himself. Right. And we're going to get, that is the exact word, that is the exact usage that Paul's going to talk about. He's going to talk about the instruments when we get down here. Not to let them be used for evil. I mean, we have all this talent, we have all this strength, we have all these things we can do, and we're always being tempted to use them for evil. It's all around us all the time.
Right.
And the worst thing is that we tend to use, our strengths become our weaknesses.
Right.
Our strengths become that's the way that we make mistakes.
Right.
And that's the way we are tempted into sin. That's the thing. So someone who's very, very passionate and loving of others, that can be used as a way to hurt them. Someone who has a great imagination, that can be used as a way to hurt them. And that's always at play. And so we're always needing to take our passions and lay them at the altar.
Right.
And say, this is my sacrifice, my living sacrifice. I am that sacrifice. Use me as you need, as you desire. And that can be in a million different ways. It really can be. It's not limiting at all. It's not that everyone has to go to a convent or something. It's not that everyone has to go into the religious life. But it's each person in their vocation being salt and light of the earth. That's hard in and of itself. That's very, very, very hard. But that's real. And so there's a sense in which passion is, we think fire, burning. It's this thing that sort of is compelling us to do something. And there's always a sense in Paul's writing and in the New Testament in general that we need to be wary of that. That kind of force can draw our heart in dangerous ways. That's almost in some ways a competing fire with the fire of the Spirit. There's kind of a sense of that. Right? So no doubt it can be used in a solid way. It's difficult once we start saying that our feelings, even our divining rod for where to go, it becomes quite dangerous for us. But let's continue on. That's an excellent question. Verse 13. So I mean, this is exactly what I was referring to, and this is an amazing verse. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. So now the idea is here is it's a positive turn on verse 12. So now we're presenting ourselves. And this presenting really almost always has a sacrificial aspect to it, as we see in verse 12, or excuse me, in chapter 12, the idea of offering ourselves as a living sacrifice. That's that same idea here. We talk about offering ourselves as a living sacrifice every single Sunday because it's a key idea of what it means to be a Christian. There's that sense here of both presenting as being, we're kind of presenting our instruments. Really, that's in a sense, that's kind of has a warlike meaning for it. So we're sort of like priests, soldiers in a sense. So there's sort of a cultic and a martial meaning here, where as a nation of priests, as Peter calls us, really echoing Deuteronomy, we are offering ourselves for the service of God. We're offering our talents, our instruments, everything we have for His purposes, and that's that key idea there. And when we do that, it's impossible for us to take our passions, for instance, and use them in improper ways, because we're always using it for the service of Him. So it's impossible for my friend, the young man who says he feels passionately that he should engage in sin, if he's offering his passion to God, if he's laying his instruments, his hands, his even his love, even his sensuality, all those parts of him, laying that down and giving it to God, it's impossible for him then to turn around and use it for evil, because he's using it for good. Now that doesn't happen accidentally. It doesn't just happen by him sitting in a room and thinking really, really hard. That happens by him staying in the Word. It happens by him being part of the body of Christ. But this recurring theme. What's interesting here is that the balance isn't exact. The balance is really interesting, and it's something that's easily missed as we roll through this. It says, "Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness." So our members are like our arms or legs. That we think of like a dismemberment policy is if you for insurance is when your arm gets cut off or something like that. But present yourselves to God as those who've been brought from death to life. So we have this comparison between members and our whole selves. So he's saying, don't present your members to sin. Present your whole self to God. What's interesting about that is what it assumes is that in the reality of chapter 6, 1 through 11, where all genuine Christians, our status has changed through baptism. It's impossible for us to give ourselves over to sin, like our whole selves. We can't do it. We're no longer citizens of that kingdom. But we can still, in a terrible way, use our instruments, use our members for sin. So that's the idea. There's no way in which we can sort of give ourselves wholly over because we're changed. Our status is different than it was before. But we can still use our members, our arms, our talents, our eyes, our intellect, everything to help sin. That's that difference there. And does that make it any less of a tragedy that it's not our whole selves? No, it makes it, in some ways, a tragedy of ingratitude, a tragedy that we wouldn't be using that the forgiveness and the love we've been given, that we wouldn't be sharing that with others, that we wouldn't be using all we have for those purposes. That's a real tragedy we find. I mean, since the self has died with Christ and been raised in order to live with God, that is going to happen. You can't not have that happen. That's going to happen. Paul's argument here is that the behavior is illogical. It doesn't make any sense that a person to present one's members to sin is to be out of tune with the reality of who you are now. Who you are is you're one with the resurrected one. You're preparing yourself for the resurrection. In some sense, like we saw in chapter 6, you already are resurrected, because it's such a sure thing that it's already in a sense happening even now. Is Paul's thing? Like he tells them they're walking on resurrected ground. That idea. And so, if that's the case, then living in sin makes no sense whatsoever. It's living against your own true identity. And in an age in which people are so confused about what identity means, in an age in which people can decide through their own will, they think, what reality is. Crazy things like, it's not crazy. This is a real problem people have. When people can say, I can decide whether I'm a man or a woman, for instance. I can decide whether or not I am a lizard or a cat. I can decide what I am through the power of my own will. I can make those decisions about things. I can be God. However untrue that all is, and how obviously sad it is. Now, what we should be saying to those people is, in love and respect, let us help you. And unfortunately, our society mutilates them. Because there's money in that, I suppose. And also it's comforting because even if we don't have those proclivities, we like the idea that it's possible to be God. We like the idea that I can create reality with my own will. So seeing that happen is comforting to people who really think that. And that's why when you ask people what happens when they die, they almost always say strange, really weird things about how they're going to create their own reality. Like whatever you believe in, that's what you get when you die. Where else is that possibly true? There's a weird sense in which people feel better about that idea by pretending that you can somehow change who you are based on the power of your will, which is preposterous. I mean, there's certain places where we don't live like that. Obviously, no one thinks they can drive through a red light through the power of their will and make it green just for them. No, people stop at a red light because they don't want to die. There are all sorts of places where that's the case. But there are these weird places where we think we can use our will to change reality. And as we saw in Romans 1, that's always been a sign of sin. But a baptized Christian has been bought from death to life. And that reality is not our doing. That's reality of what Christ has done. Verse 14. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. Sin will not have any dominion over you. That's that language again of dominion. Sin does not have power over you. It is no longer your Lord. And there's a sense that before one is a Christian, before one is regenerate, one is under the lordship of sin and death. Remember, sin and death are the same thing. Whenever we think sin, we should be thinking death. What the Trinity have done through the plan of salvation is they have made death not the end. They've made death now the path to resurrection, which is an amazing upending of all that. And what's beautiful about that is it doesn't make it not mean anything. This isn't just sort of what people call a sort of a fiction, right? This isn't God is saying do-over. The sin really matters. The pain of people throughout history really matters. All of this is really, really mattered. This isn't just a do-over. So it's not just a sense where it says, oh, just do-over, or don't worry about it, none of that really matters. It still all really matters. And so this is the way in which we feel it and see that it matters. And this is the way we're enlisted into being part of the solution. We are, meager parts of it, but we're still part of it, which is amazing. It really is amazing. So what's fascinating here is he says, for sin will have no dominion over you. That's actually not an imperative. He's not saying do this. He's not even saying it as an exhortation. It's an indicative. It's a statement, but it's already true. It's already true of every genuine Christian. So sin, again, has no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. We're no longer in the kingdom of sin, death. We're in this grace, righteousness, life kingdom. Therefore, sin may still be a force to reckon with in the world. It's still powerful and terrible and horrible, but it has no authority over the Christian. No ultimate authority over the Christian. And that is such a liberating idea, that thing has no more power over us. Even when we think of, the worst sins in the whole world, the worst things anyone can do to us, the worst things we can do to ourselves, they have no more power. There's no reason for us to do them anymore. We don't need them, even if we try to convince ourselves we do, which is amazing. And we do try to convince ourselves we do. So this idea of being not under the law, that's how we change. That's how he finishes this. Since you are not under the law, but under grace. A key idea for this is Galatians 3:23. It's on page 1076. Look at page 1076 really quickly. And I'll read this, verse 23, top of 1076. Now before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. For in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to promise. So that's Romans 4, that's Romans 5, Romans 6. That's that same argument Paul's been making for many years. And we see it here again, really fleshed out in Galatians. So we see the great freedom that's come in faith. Now, what we need to recognize in that, though, is what the problem that so many do when they read that verse is they think of our concept of freedom as being what Paul's talking about, not being the Bible's concept of freedom, where freedom to sin is no freedom at all. Freedom to do evil is not freedom. Freedom to do bad is not freedom, or certainly not a good. And so it's careful here with this. I mean, this question asks, well, if the law doesn't matter anymore, why is he always talking about things we need to do? It's because he's not saying that the law isn't important. He's not saying that the believer is free from the obligations to keep the law. He's saying that believers standing before God rests on Christ's righteousness and not on what we've done. It's no longer a question of, oh, as long as if you follow the law somehow, that is what saves you. It's not our self-righteousness that saves us. It's the righteousness of Christ. And that's epically freeing in terms of who we are. That our justification comes by faith in that, not in our own attempts to keep the law. Now, the law is still binding us. It's still something that we do because it's a measure of holiness. But that is no longer the means by which one is saved. Now, what comes out of a life of one justified by faith is the following of the law. In fact, it's the only way that one follows the law. The only way one can truly follow the law is through a heart remade, made from stone, turned from stone into flesh. That's the great irony here that Paul will talk about, or at least already talked about, and we'll talk about later as well. But not being under that law, we no longer have that sword hanging over us. Instead, we're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. That's great news, beautiful news. And we're being transformed into the likeness of Christ day by day. Once again, we're walking towards that. Our aging isn't a decay into death and nothingness. All the saints right now, saints in this room, saints all over the earth, are every day being hewn, being formed, being made into the people who will live in the new heaven and the new earth. That's the ultimate destination. And it changes the way we think about our day-to-day life. It's no longer this thing like this. Everyone knows the sad image of the middle-aged crisis guy with the ponytail, balding, and the little sports car he buys, and the affair he has, where he's desperately trying to hold on to this pathetic idea of what it means to be alive. When the truth of what it means to be alive is putting all that behind him and moving towards resurrection and glory. And we look at that and we know it's pathetic. We get that that's pathetic. We just don't always know why it's pathetic. And what is he holding on to? He's holding on to this false resurrection. He thinks he can resurrect himself. He can't. It's pathetic. We know it. And everyone kind of has these things they go through. It changes the way we think about our entire lives. If we think about that, that's our trajectory. It no longer, who cares how old a person is? And that's so weird. We all go through that, and people freak out about these things. Go through crises. Oh my goodness, I'm 40 or so, 50. What does it matter? At the end, in the end, if you're heading towards resurrection and glorification, it doesn't matter at all. The only thing it should remind us of is that we have one less day to proclaim the glory of our King. But we're moving towards an eternity of doing just that in His new heaven and new earth.
Then if we look at it on the other end too,
sure.
For the people who fear getting older and older, it's just grateful that God's given us another day to
Indeed.
to come more into what He's called us to be.
Absolutely, He has.
Instead of fearing it, just embrace it and thank Him.
Exactly. That's a wholly different way of thinking about life.
Yeah.
It becomes much harder to be depressed about life and about where one's going when we recognize that it's not, our work. Our work is not going to save the world. It's already been saved. Our work is to be the town crier telling people the King is coming. And then on top of that every single day we're heading towards this ultimate reality of joy and peace and love forever. But it's so easy to forget all of that.
Right.
It's so easy to go into our normal days and just kind of be, what's my next thing I have to do? Or what's this I have to do? Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. And lose all that. Right. And then the stress level goes up. And then they do really dumb things because they're stressed and they're trying to find a release for that. And then their life is a shambles and they want to know, how did I get here? or they have deep existential dread. Like they're just sad about everything, and every little thing happens. Like, you know, their dog dies and they're just destroyed. They just have no hope, and they can't leave the house. I mean, that's sad. Sure, it is, and we feel that sadness, but that despair is a sign of a lack of hope. And Christians have that assured hope. And if you can't show that to people and show them what they're missing in that, that desire is there. It absolutely is. It's in all of us. And it's not a pipe dream. It's not an unsubstantiated claim. It's a claim made real in the historical resurrection of Christ, testified by generation after generation of witnesses handed down to us. And it still is true now. It's still amazing now, as when Paul tells us of our freedom here in this text. And this has been what made the gospel powerful from then until now.
I read something but it kind of spoke to what you're talking about. You know, the person, like you said, who's getting older and is trying to reach for some joy that we can give ourselves.
Sure,
then, you know, after the ponytail and scores, I'm still, you know, feeling whatever way I'm feeling.
Right.
But it talked about, if we just, you know, stay close to the heart of God and seeking Him, He just pours that into us anyway, so you kind of can somehow, His joy gives you that youth that we can't. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's a way that we can still get older, but still feel a sense of happiness and vibrance and all that. And it didn't come through the ponytail, the sports car.
No, because those things never do.
But it's just the seeking Him, and then
right. No, I think
do
that's
that with a joyful heart, and then we naturally get that thing that we're trying to get on our.
And what's even more important, and you know, that's absolutely true. I mean, and in the West, we have been blessed. We have peace. We have prosperity. We have all those things. I mean, this is a gospel not just for us, and you know, this is a gospel also for the people who are going through hell.
Right.
For the mass majority of people on earth, they do not experience the world like we do. Right. You know, their kids die. They get sick. Everyone they know, the horrors of what happens in places like the Sudan, as we read about. You can't even imagine that horror. And this gospel is good news for them. And ultimately, there's no sense in which this is going to be the way people in North America are going to live forever.
Right.
And this gospel is going to be true then too.
Right.
There's a certain sense, and this is a very, this is we peer into the abyss a bit here. There's a certain sense where, is this good for us even? Is this much comfort good for us as people growing in sanctification? There's some sense, and maybe it's not. And we sort of, as I say, we peer into the abyss there, and we do our best to kind of do what we can. But it's recognizing that this gospel is just as true for those people who are suffering, much more than we are, and recognizing sometimes it's hard for us to think of suffering as being a part of our holiness. That joy is definitely can be part of our lives and part of God's touch on us. But there's also suffering as God's touch on us, and that's difficult, I think, sometimes for us to wrap our heads around. Paul gets it. I mean, he's getting beaten up every time he goes to. He's writing, Ephesians, that beautiful letter we listened to last Sunday, and he's writing that in prison, chained to a guard. I mean, he knows real suffering, and he knows that isn't a sign that God hates him. It's a sign that God loves him, and that He's seeing him through these things and preparing for the kingdom. And he's happy he's being used this way. That mindset is very difficult for us to wrap our heads around. But it's beautiful and wonderful, and every day we should be trying harder and harder to get there. And when we stop, we tend to start to trust in ourselves and our things for our salvation. And the problem is too, this can be taken too far. This can also become used by various groups where they sort of siphon off all the God part of it and just siphon in, economic determinism, Marxism, other things, and sort of replace that. This is, of course, one of the great terrors of so much bad theology that comes from in our modern times. We become the agents by which we bring the new heaven and the new earth, and you don't even need that whole God thing. Unfortunately, then you don't need you get rid of it all, and once again you're left with nothing, because God is everything in this.
Exactly.
But it's a beautiful few verses. We could talk about them all night. But any other questions at all? I mean, we'll end on this thought that our self-righteousness can never be enough, because it's never going to be enough to topple the reign of sin and death. Our reality as those saved by Christ is that we can never go back to the devil. So we can never go back there. And even physical death will be used for God's purpose, as sin has no longer any authority over us. So even the most horrible things we can think of in this world, I mean, death is a hard thing for us to wrap our heads around. But even that is the last enemy to be defeated, as St. Paul puts it. And we can face it with a joyful heart, knowing that on the other end is perpetual glory. So anything at all, please.